We're on top of the hour. Over to you, Doctor.
Good morning, everyone. You are welcome to the second edition of the 2026 Manuscript Writing Hub Academy Virtual Conference under the theme Amplifying African Scholarship, Writing for Impact in a Complex World. Before we hand over to the facilitator of the keynote session, I'd like to take you through a few housekeeping rules. So, as displayed on the screen, for our Francophone brothers and sisters, there's translation services provided. So for step one, you scan the QR code on the screen with your phone. You select your preferred language. So for Francophone speakers, you select English. And then for the step three, you unmute to activate the voice translation. But the transcription will also be showing on your phone. So you can choose to either activate the voice or read the transcriptions through your phone. So I'll hand over to my colleague Fafa for her to also give the translation in French for our Francophone speakers. Thank you.
Bonjour et bonsoir à tous. Ok, pour la première étape, vous aurez à scanner le code QR avec votre téléphone. Deuxième étape, vous sélectionnez votre langue préférée, dans ce cas-ci le français. Et pour la troisième étape, vous pouvez lire ou écouter la traduction qui sera autogénérée par l'intelligence artificielle. Vous aurez donc à cliquer sur l'icône qui montre audio pour activer la voix. Merci.
Merci, Fafa. Thank you, Gordon. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from across the continent and beyond. Welcome to day one of our 3-day virtual conference. As Gordon said, this is entitled Amplifying African Scholarship, Writing for Impact in a Complex World. It is truly, truly my privilege to convene such a vibrant community of early career researchers, mentors, and thought leaders, individuals who are not only producing knowledge, but who are shaping the future of African scholarship. Today's keynote is especially important because it sets the tone, not just for this conference, but how we think as Africans, how we think about our work moving forward. At the heart of the discussions over the next few days is a simple but powerful question. Whose knowledge counts? Who produces it? And who ultimately benefits from it? So it is my great honor indeed to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Seye Abimbola. Dr. Abimbola is a Nigerian-trained physician who has become one of the most compelling and I would say disruptive voices in global health today. His journey began on the front lines at Nigeria's National Primary Health Care Development Agency, where he witnessed firsthand the realities many of us are familiar with, the imbalance of power between well-resourced international actors, and the communities they aim to serve. That experience did not just shape his career, it defined his purpose. Today, he is an associate professor and principal research fellow at the University of Sydney's School of Public Health. Many of you will also know him as the founding editor-in-chief of BMJ Global Health, where he transformed the journal into a powerful platform for voices from here, from the Global South. But more than his titles and his accolades, what distinguishes Dr. Abimbola is his willingness to challenge the status quo. And today he is going to challenge the status quo. He does ask uncomfortable questions and he pushes all of us to think differently about the systems we work with. I refer you to his landmark book, The Foreign Gaze. I will not take much of your time, but in that book, he introduces a concept that is both simple and deeply, deeply unsettling. He argues that the distance between those who produce knowledge and those who are the subjects of that knowledge is at the root of inequity in global health. In other words, research about Africa is too often not led by Africans, and that must stop today, immediately. The questions are often defined elsewhere, and the answers are shaped to meet external expectations. So today, as we listen to this keynote address, I invite you to reflect on, are we writing to be seen or are we writing to truly see? Dr. Abimbola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mgodi, for that warm, generous, kind introduction. And I decided that I was going to focus on writing itself and what happens when a person, a scholar, junior, senior, early career, and otherwise, set out to try to say something to the world about something they care about. And in trying to figure out what to say to this particular audience, I went deep into my own self and asked myself, what are the things that I think about when I set out to do that particular thing, which is to write? And what are the things that I wish people would think about first when they set out to write or to do scholarship, to do research, which often ideally would end in the place of writing, or at least involve writing in the chain of the things that follow from it. And like I said, in trying to decide what to say to this audience, I went back and went through a set of questions that I more implicitly than not pose to myself whenever I'm trying to write. And I have 10 questions that I will go through one by one and explain to you why I ask those questions and how I try to answer them, and why it is important to have answers to those questions as part of how we decide what we do with writing if we want to write for impact. And in a sense, also, these questions are implicit in my essay collection that Dr. Godi mentioned a couple of minutes ago. There are questions that, in a sense, are at the heart of that book, which is, again, why do we do the work that we do? And how can we do it most consequentially? In other words, how can we do it in ways that optimize impact? And what are the forces that stand in our way of being impactful? And how do we think ourselves out of that, fight ourselves out of that, write ourselves out of that even? Anyway, so 10 questions, they are all on this screen. The first one is, who am I writing as? In other words, who am I? What is my purpose? And you will see on the cover page of the book that is on this screen, there's a boy posing for another boy who is behind the camera taking a shot. And those boys are, in fact, South African boys, but I won't go into the story. It is somewhere close to the cover of the book. The second question is, who am I writing for? In other words, what is the gaze? What is the audience whose influence is important or plays a role in shaping what I say? The third question is, what am I writing for? In other words, what is the purpose? And in thinking about the purpose, we ask ourselves, what is the theory of change that is at the heart of the purpose of the writing itself? What change am I trying to bring about? And following from that, there are a couple of questions that I also ask as to how one may think about that theory of change. What are the things involved in how one thinks about how a piece of writing, a piece of research, does its job in the world? So what is the role of disconnection within a system, within a space in it? But also, what is the role of learning? If we are to think about learning as a primary function of knowledge production. And then going from there to think about who's learning, one is interested in, and to what end, and also in thinking about the role of epistemic injustice in the choices we make as to whose learning needs, whose knowledge, whose sense making plays a big role in what we write and study and analyze and interpret. And why should we even care about those injustices? And then I wrap up with a couple of questions. One of them is how we think about the kinds of ethical standards one might hold oneself to. And the final one is what it means to even take oneself seriously, which in a sense loops back to the first question, which is, who am I writing for? Or who am I writing as? Anyway, so those are the 10 questions, and I'll go through them one by one now. So the first one, which is who am I writing as, speaks to the concept of pose, again, how one positions oneself in relation to an audience, in relation to a target, as it were. Or as in that picture that I showed in the previous slide, in relation to a camera, a metaphorical camera, taking a shot. And in asking that question, there are a few questions that stem from that. One of which is, what am I best positioned to do well? And there's a sense in most of what I will be talking about that a lot of it would seem so commonsensical. And that is by design, because these are often taken for granted things, or things that we haven't been socialized and educated to think of as important things to think through as scholars, as writers, as academics, as researchers. So again, I will be going through things that you likely have taken for granted, but you shouldn't take for granted. So again, what am I best positioned to do well, given your attributes, your learning, your experience, your disposition, your commitments, etc. And given where you stand in relation to the social reality or system or problem or solution that you are trying to write about or think through and analyze, what are you, or what am I, as it were, positioned to see well, given that as humans we are inherently limited in our cognitive capabilities to see the world, given just how complex the world itself is. Which means that what we often see, what we often can know and say and understand fully, reflects where we stand in relation to that thing. Which also then means that once we acknowledge the partiality of our grasp of a social system or reality, we're also at the same time also acknowledging that there are other positions, there are other actors, as it were, in other positions relative to that social system, who have a different pose compared to us, and who then see the system differently, see a different part of it, understand a different component of it really well. And again, if you're looking at the slide, you already see the image of the elephant and 6 blind people, or in this case, blindfolded people. And And one of the versions of the poem that explains this parable, it's an ancient Indian parable, ends, the last stanza ends with this, that though each was partly right, all were in the wrong. In other words, that each person, each of the six people around this elephant thought it was a different thing. They were all partly right, as it were, as what will always often be in relation to a complex social system or reality, such that, again, there are other actors, there are other ways of seeing, ways of knowing, ways of grasping that exist in relation to that thing. I think I'll return again to what this means as I go along. The second question is, who am I writing for? Again, like I said earlier, who one thinks one is writing for exerts a power, a force, has agency that shapes what it is we do. And again, going back to that parable of the elephant and six blindfolded people, it would strike you, if you think about it a bit more, that each of those blindfolded people is using a metaphor. In other words, they have a mental frame for what the elephant feels like on the side of it that they touch. And they use that mental frame or that metaphor, likely with the suspicion that the person listening to them shares a similar mental frame. In other words, that if you can imagine a blind person who may have seen or knows what a tree looks like or a fan looks like, but things other people don't, or things the person standing next to them does not, that they will likely not use that metaphor that the other person, that they have no reason to think the other person knows. In other words, again, the choices of what we say, how we say it, how we frame things, how we analyze things, the ways in which you communicate social reality, complex reality, depends often on who we think is listening and the assumptions we make or are willing to make about that thing. Such that if we were to bring the answer to question 1 or prompt 1 and prompt 2 together, we may say that whom we write as and whom we write for as very important in how we write and what we write and the potential impact it can have. But also, we can say that our accounts and our analysis of complex social systems and realities say more about where one stands, about where you stand, and says more about your audience than it says about that objective social reality itself. Just as we may say the same about those 6 blindfolded people around the elephant. The third prompt or question is, what am I writing for? And this is a particularly important prompt because it takes us to purpose. And purpose here means that what is it that we think will happen? What is it that we wish would happen as a consequence of what we have written? And what is our theory for how that thing happens? In other words, what happens after we've written? What happens to the person who reads it? What do we want them to do after having read it? What do we think then happens after they've done that thing? And then what happens after that, and after that, and after that? That leads to the result or the desired, envisioned goal. And it's important to have such a theory, again, to answer it for yourself when you are doing scholarship. To really know to have this good enough sense of the chain of events that lead from your work to a desired goal. And there's it's one of the founders of the field of social psychology, Kurt Lewin, was famous for repeatedly saying that there's nothing as practical as a good theory. Once you have a sense of how things may unfold, then you can go to work. You can go to work knowing exactly what you think might happen and doing your best to optimize the chances that thing happens. And it's in strategic planning, this is often called backcasting, like the opposite of forecasting. So you go to the future, you go to the end, and you work your way back. So that how you theorize things might unfold, then comes to shape how you set things up. Um, and here I was also thinking of the metaphor of how one may investigate, say, a crime scene. In other words, how we imagine things work shape how we inquire about it. How we imagine change would happen shapes the kind of steps we take in order to make change happen. And being clear about what those steps are, that goes from present to the desired future, and then working our way back from there. Again, backcasting is a word I will return to a couple of times as I go along, is very important. Now, in thinking about that theory of change, something implicit in it is also a theory of the problem. Because you can't theorize the path to change without, at the same time, implicitly. Again, often we do these things implicitly. It's not as if we don't do them at all. We do them unevenly, we do them implicitly, we do them without a lot of discipline, without a lot of strategic consideration. Anyway, so the theorizing change, you must have theorized what the problem is. So this is a version, one of the ways in which I think about what the problem is when I'm theorizing change. One of the problems is that we are functioning within social systems, and I know we are speaking to African realities here, and we are thinking of African future here. And a good way of understanding, or at least of breaking down what the problem is one of disconnection. Disconnection among actors with responsibility for positive change within a system. So I often would sort those actors into 4 categories, and I've put something that looks like a triangle on this slide to show 3 of those actors. I call one of them engineers. In that basket, I put governments, policymakers, people who are often typically distant from the ground and from social realities. And you can put in that category as well foreign actors within in the field that we call global health, etc. And number 2, I put different kinds of community groups, activists, advocates, I call them emancipators, people who try to make engineers behave themselves. I would try to force them, push them, challenge them, cajole them, etc. Or at least who wish they could. And I put as 3rd category plumbers. In other words, people who are involved in all kinds of service delivery, practitioners of all kinds. Again, you can imagine it's in health, you can imagine it in the social sector, you can imagine it in finance, all kinds of service delivery actors. And I have as the 4th category of actors, people like us, people of our tribe, of our ilk, who are academics or researchers, and I call them, all of us, professors, whose job then it is to serve as a connector between these different actors, to make the voice and the needs and the concerns and the perspectives and the preferences of one group unavoidably, undisguisedly, push-awayedly available to those who have a responsibility to make decisions and act to make the kind of change that we desire happen. And that 4th category, which when we also think of as the 4th estate of the realm, absolutely by chance, it does happen to be number 4 on my list. We can think of ourselves as knowledge mongers in a similar way that one may think of even journalists, right? Of different actors at different scales of a system. We can think of these within a community. There are actors there whose job it is to do this work of connection, and I will still in my head call them professors. And we can think of them at the district level, at the national level, and also at the global level. Again, where there are actors like us whose role it is to do that work of connection, to bridge the distance that Dr. Mgodi was describing in her introduction, that often exists between people with power, with resources, with finances, with money, and those who should be, to whom they ought to be responsible, those to whom they ought to listen. And again, that is the point of connection. It is so that a system or a space, and we can interpret what a system is at different scales. We can interpret what a space is at different scales. Ensuring that a space or a system can learn more about itself from itself, so that it's accountable and responsive and responsible to all parts of itself, and especially to the parts of itself that are marginalized. Again, itself here could be the world, right? And again, to think of who has power in the world and who is marginalized in the world, and who should be responsible and responsive to them, and who makes the connection between those actors happen. In the same way as we may also render that same set of relationships within a community or within a country, that there are in different spaces marginalized people, are marginalized interests, marginalized sections, whose needs, whose activists and advocates, whether as member of those groups or on behalf of them, want to make their voices heard, and for whom it is our role and responsibility to make that connection happen. And understanding that one of the ways we may think of, one of the ways we theorize change then is to theorize it in terms of connection. If we are plotting the path from our writing or from our research, from our scholarship to impact, we can plot that path as something that has to do with solving a connection problem. And then again, plotting what happens subsequently. So that's one way of thinking about the theory of change from our work to impact. Another way of thinking about the theory of change, which again is another prompt I often give to myself, and something I've worked on quite a bit, including with the WHO, is on the role of learning in how one thinks about that theory of change. Again, because most of the change we want to see in the world, most of the change we want to see in terms of improvement in health and equity in health and reversal of injustices, etc., includes, requires that some actors, whether they are in the engineer column or whether they are in the emancipator column, whether they are in the plumber column, or in fact whether they are us in the professor column. We all often have reason and cause to want to make the link between our past actions, evaluate and assess the effectiveness of those actions, and plot future actions, which is what learning is. Learning happens when we make that link. That's that three-way link between past action, the effectiveness of those actions, and future actions. And the learners, it's not always the government or the advocates or the practitioners. Sometimes it is us. Something I found early in my career is that I am often the most important beneficiary of a piece of research that I've done or a piece of writing that I've done, because what it does is help me clarify my thinking on that particular thing, so that when I find myself in a space, in a place that requires that I articulate clearly what it is I think, articulate clearly what it is the evidence says, that articulate clearly how to think about the thing, it is readily available to me in ways that I would then hope is also available to others as a result of the work that I've done. But often we are that actor making the connection, and the research that we will do will serve us. Just as it may also serve other researchers, other scholars within our ecosystem. Again, I can imagine how our work, again, the path to change may be that we are thinking of how other researchers can do their research better. We are thinking of what methods work better. We're thinking of how to make the effectiveness of past actions clear, or the lack of effectiveness thereof. This may be to practitioners, to activists and advocates, or to governments and policymakers, so that they can think differently about future action, so that we are helping them learn. Future action, again, in doing the work of engineering, or doing the work of emancipating, or doing the work of plumbing, as it were. And again, we can think of these actors at different scales in different spaces. And a very useful way to think about learning is something I've learned from organizational learning literature, which is to think of learning in terms of loops. And that is the image on this slide. To think that often what happens with learning, what happens as a result of it, is that we just change the actions, that we see that our action is not giving the kind of result and the outcomes that we desire, and then we adjust them. But sometimes what it requires of us is that we shift our frameworks, our mental models, and our assumptions that are guiding the actions that we take. That's a higher level of learning. It's a more difficult thing to achieve, which also means that if we understand that that is the kind of change we want, then we are packing more force and energy and strategy behind our writing, our scholarship, our research, etc., to achieve that. And sometimes what we're trying to achieve is, in fact, to change how a system goes about doing the work of learning. Sometimes it means we are building new learning structures, we're building new learning platforms, which would often also include building new platforms for connection, as the previous prompt will make us think. And the next prompt that is often on my mind, and I'm often wishing is on the mind of other people, is then, of these four sets of actors that I have described, whose learning am I in service of, and to what end? And this is not, there's no bias here. I'm not saying you have to be in the service of the learning of engineers or professors or emancipators or plumbers. You could be in the service of the learning of any of these actors, or all of them together, in fact, depending on how you've theorized the purpose of the work and how you've plotted the path to impact, so that you can backcast to then what you choose to do and how you plot a way there. But it's useful to be able to think about these actors not just on a flat plane, but also as understanding that they can occupy varying positions within a social system or within a particular location. So again, we may think of the actors who often are the engineers and who often are, in fact, professors in different spaces, as tending, not always, but tending to be distant, sometimes even foreign in a geographical sense, but also could be foreign in a social sense, right? In other words, could be foreign just by the fact of being elite and powerful in a system. Again, often they would have more power compared to actors. Again, not always the case, but it's a useful heuristic to think with, that more proximate actors who may be practitioners of all kinds, activists, advocates who may be non-elite, who hence less powerful. Again, note, it's very important, note that a person or a group of people is not necessarily fixed in how they are positioned among these four. An academic could be a practitioner, an academic could be an activist. This refers to roles much more than it refers to people, as it were. It refers to functions that one may want to support and optimize with the results of scholarship, with writing, etc. So again, in thinking about this, it's worth taking seriously the need to have potentially multiple pathways to impact, or at least be able to see different potential pathways to impact. Because one of the things that we tend to default to is to think that the most important path to impact is the policymaker. Not always, not necessarily. It could be through other channels. Again, having a clear idea, a clearly theorized path from the work to the impact helps see clearly who else is there. but also helps see clearly who in an ecosystem we don't tend to serve as people who are in the knowledge business, or we don't tend to be in intellectual engagement with as people who are in the knowledge business. And it makes it necessary for me to think and say this, that it's important that we avoid being powerful actors, speaking to only powerful actors um, in an ecosystem. Because the risk of that, and what happens in reality very often, is that power just reinforces power and we are in a loop onto ourselves, completely often disconnected from the real needs of people whose needs ought to be served. Yeah. So the next prompt is, how do I avoid epistemic injustice? What I've described just there in the last sort of paragraph that I voiced out is something that we may describe as epistemic injustice. In other words, the exclusion, the prejudicial, often prejudicial exclusion of or leaving out of certain people from intellectual engagement, whether as people who are credible producers of knowledge, or in fact, people who we may want to deem credible, important, necessary audience of the knowledge we produce. And in thinking about how we pay attention to those who are left out, it's useful to think about the reason why we often leave people out. And we often leave people out in two broad ways. So it manifests in two broad ways. One of them, as theorized by a British feminist philosopher, Miranda Fricker, is that we may deem some people as not being credible producers of knowledge, um, often without, in fact, having so determined empirically. But we just like, this is who this person is like, this is what they do, they can't know, or they can't be, in fact, a legitimate audience of the knowledge that I am producing, as it were. Or that people and groups of people, categories of people whose cultural, technical knowledge or whose capacity or need to articulate knowledge we find easy to disregard. Or people whose knowledge needs and platforms and standards are treated as if they do not matter. Again, without this being empirically determined to be so. The second category or second way in which this living out may manifest is something called hermeneutical or interpretive injustice or marginalization. Again, which is to deem some people's interpretation or sense making as not good enough or useful as what shapes the analysis or the writing, or disregarded because they're not even imagined or imaginable to us as being legitimate as audience of the work that we do, or whose idea of what research should be and the partnerships that should shape it, and the kind of understanding and grasp of social reality that should inform it, we easily disregard, or whose overall needs, learning needs, etc., we find easy to push aside. Again, well, we can look at a knowledge ecosystem or a space and carefully ask ourselves who is not present here, who is being left out. And why should we care? And again, on the title slide for this talk is the word transdisciplinary research for Africa's future. To be transdisciplinary means that we are in fact not being epistemically unjust. Which again for me is one way which I think about why I should care and why I should care that people care about epistemic injustice is that it speaks to and it goes to quality and rigor and how impact in fact happens. Because if you care deeply about epistemic injustice, you also it leads you to be transdisciplinary in your work, right? Because you're bringing the knowledge and the frameworks and the concepts and the worldviews from the academic space, as the image on this slide shows, in direct intellectual engagement with the knowledge and frameworks and concepts and worldviews of actors outside of that space. And you're not just thinking of actors that are powerful outside of that space, but also actors that are not powerful, that are in fact marginalized outside of the academic space. Such that we come together in ways that allow us to see the problems we want to solve clearly, also see the solutions clearly, have a clear understanding of what the needs are and how to go about addressing them in ways that are respectful of the knowledge and the needs and the preferences of these different actors. So again, it goes to quality, rigor, and impact, right? Because these different actors who are standing at different points relative to the elephant on the slide for the first prompt, so that in the coming together of ideas and insights from these different positions, we get to see the whole more clearly. It means that our perspectives are enriched. It means our accounts are checked for their partiality, complemented with those for that positions. It also means you're able to see the problems and solutions from different points of view, often disregarded points of view and interpretations. Again, consider the elephant. The ninth prompt, remember I'm going to 10, so I'm about to wrap up. The ninth prompt speaks to something that is, again, often on my mind, which is that the standard of ethics that we are approved for ethics by fall short severely of the kind of standards we ought to be held to and that we ought to hold ourselves to if we are going to do good, impactful, sensible, epistemically just transdisciplinary work. That there's no way that the things that the ethics committees assess and check, if that was the bar, if that was the utmost, that we were severely falling short of what we ought to be holding ourselves to. And in an analysis of what people wish we would hold ourselves to do epistemically just work, which we did and was published less than a year ago now in Lancet Global Health. We synthesized a lot of those views into 4 broad categories of the kinds of standards we have been asked to hold ourselves to and we should hold ourselves to. And we frame them in terms of dignity-based practice, in other words, practices that affirm the dignity, especially of marginalized others, as knowers, as epistemic agents in our writing, in our scholarship, in our research, etc. The first of those is transparency, which is that we are transparency, which is that we declare and justify the choices we make, our epistemic choices, and account for the worldviews and practices of people who are marginalized relative to us, again, within the space within which we are working. Which is because it's so often the case that some people's views, some people's perspectives and needs are overrepresented in a lot of global scholarship, but also local scholarship. The second of those expectations is non-extraction, which is to make sure that knowledge production is not exploitative, but primarily benefits the groups again we are in service of. Democratization, which is to make sure that the people who are being studied, who are often outside of that academic space, in fact, play a lead role in all the decisions made about the research itself and its product. And again, the kind of humility, the epistemic humility that invites is in itself transformational. But the fourth expectation is transformation, which is not just transformation within the epistemic landscape itself, but also transformation of the material realities or the conditions that created the problem that we're trying to address, so that we are not just trying to solve symptoms, but our analysis, our thinking, our theories of change include, in fact, what's often called the upstream or the structural determination of the conditions that we are trying to address. 10, and this is my final slide. How do I take myself seriously? Again, I frame this prompt in this way because I often get this sense that far too many people do research and do writing in a tick box way. That I've been asked to do this, we've been asked to do this, so I'm going to do it. I need this for my promotion or for the next grant, so I do it. There's that mindlessness that I think is important to avoid, because to be that is to not take oneself seriously. And to ask the question, how do I take myself seriously, is to go back to the first prompt, which is, who am I writing as? Who am I really? Yeah. And even that question itself, trying to answer that question, you cannot not take yourself seriously. And being true to yourself in answering that question, as was in this line from Hamlet, from Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Prospero was, I think it was Prospero, was giving a speech to his son, Polonius it was. Polonius was giving a speech to his son, who was about to go on a journey, and this was the final line in that speech, where it said, "This above all to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, that thou canst not then be false to any man." So again, the reason why I've gone through the talk in this way is to encourage a kind of seriousness. Because if we are serious, then we can fight the battles we have to fight. But if we allow ourselves to not be serious, then we won't be able to fight. And of course, in seriousness, we take courage seriously. We believe that we can actually bring about change, or at least trigger the processes and walk through what that process looks like carefully. That may bring about change, and nurture that process and do our work, put our effort and energies and intellect in service of that goal and of change. Thank you very much.
Wow, wow, wow. I'm totally speechless. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Doc, you've really, really challenged me and many others here. You know, there were things that I was accepting as business as usual, but you've totally challenged me. Personally, you've asked me to reconsider who sets research agendas and why us African researchers are often positioned as data collectors rather than leaders. But I am a leader in my own way. I'll introduce myself in a minute. You've pushed us to move beyond participation to true ownership. So thank you. Thank you for that ownership of ideas, of research questions, and of the knowledge we produce. And you've taken us into the politics of knowledge about funding structures, publication systems, and even language, how they shape what gets studied, what gets published, and what gets ignored. And perhaps for me, most importantly, you've challenged me to think about dignity in research, what it means to center communities, not just as research subjects, but as equal partners. So really, thank you so much, Doc. I really enjoyed that. And I am watching and Gordon will help me. I'm watching the chat for any questions and comments. So I'll take this time to introduce myself to the participants. I hadn't done that before because I was eager for us to get to your important talk, Dr. Abimbola. So to our participants, my name is Nyaradzo Mugodi. I am Dr. Mugodi. I'm a medical doctor, a clinical trials specialist from the University of Zimbabwe. I have 20 years experience conducting research. So thank you, Prof. Morenike and Gordon, for pairing me with Dr. Abimbola here. He's from one spectrum, I'm from the other. I spent my day in the clinic conducting clinical trials, and us meeting halfway. I do the work. You've talked to us about how to come up with ideas, how to get published, and all that. So thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions. I have loads, but I'll open this to our our participants. So participants, please post your comments, questions in the chat, introduce yourself. Prof. Morenike, I think you can speak. If you can, please unmute and ask your questions. The other questions, I'll be reading them from the chat box. But Prof. Morenike.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Godo. I actually brought the question from the Q&A. It's not my question.
It's not your
Yes.
question.
It's
Thank
in the
you.
Q&A.
So,
Yes, ma'am.
oh, perfect. So the question reads, how do we ensure that research participants benefit from our research? We get the promotions, the visibility, and other direct benefits, but I'm having a hard time conceptualizing how those providing us with research data benefit. So what are the benefits of research participation?
What this question suggests is that the thinking about the benefits happened after the research. In other words, that the thinking about the benefits, or what I describe as backcasting, in other words, to think about what the goal of this research is and then work back from there. That if we begin the research with the goal of its impact for those people in mind, then we wouldn't need to ask this question after the research is done, because that question will be part of the research itself from the get-go. And that it's a tricky thing. It cannot not be like this if it's after the fact. That's how I would answer that briefly.
Thank you. And I see the questions coming in like that.
Yeah.
So rest assured, our participants, Dr. Abimbola will take time to respond to you when we move to the next session. He will be responding to you in the chats. But I also just wanted to reassure our listener or our participant about the benefits of study participation. Remember, there's always the informed consent. Before anyone enters into a research study, they have to go through informed consent process. So there are hard benefits, there are soft benefits, but we also don't just talk about the benefits, we must also talk about the risks so that a person makes an informed decision. A quick one, what is the maximum number of authors per manuscript?
There's no maximum number. Some journals may impose some maximum, often arbitrarily, often not for research papers. They could maximum for a commentary or for a perspective piece. For research, especially in public health and medicine, there's hardly ever a limit. So not to worry about that. I'll just quickly go through the questions I'm seeing, and I'll just speak to them directly. What do you do with tight schedules to produce writing? Won't pressure make one go unethical? That is it's a real thing. It's a very, very real thing. And I've seen it play out close enough to me to know that it's a real problem. For every problem like this in life, what one says to oneself is, I would do my best to not go unethical. Right? Hold yourself to a high standard. You won't always be able to meet it. There will be times when you can't meet it. But don't stay in the guilt of not meeting it when you don't meet it. So that next time you do it, you try harder. There's another question here about how can an African scholar navigate the tension between producing knowledge that is academically recognized by global institutions and producing knowledge that is genuinely accountable to local communities, especially when the standards of rigor, publication, and impact are often defined externally. This is a real question in many ways. And again, for me, the way I come at this, and I say this, having run an academic journal for quite a long time, is to do, if you are going to challenge the system, or if you're going to challenge entrenched practices, you have to do your homework really well. Make sure that you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. You have your argument and your explanation and your justification well lined up. That you're even making it in the cover letter to the editor. It is implicit in your abstract. You're clear that I am doing something that I know you think by your standards it doesn't work, but I'm going to show you why it makes sense. So it's a you have to do extra in order to do a good job. Again, I understand that the resources to do extra is not evenly distributed. So some people will be able to do extra, some won't. It's a real issue. Uh,
What strategies could you share with us in approaching high impact journals? So is it just about the number of publications or the impact? Or can you talk about that? Mm-hmm.
High impact journals are there's a range of them. Uh, if you want something I often say to people is if you want high impact journals to notice you, because there is a bias in in those spaces, especially bias to do with name recognition, right? In other words, if I submit something to a very high impact journal and they know my name, they will pause. They will pause and say, okay, this guy, if they don't know my name and they see some in their mind a random affiliation, they're often quick to dismiss, right? Now, a practical strategy that I often recommend is uh, uh, start by writing short pieces, opinion pieces, letters to the editor, commenting on things, serving as peer reviewer sometimes. In other words, get yourself known a bit, and sometimes reach out to the editors. Say I am this person from this university in Zimbabwe. This is what I'm doing. I would like to submit a manuscript to you. What do you think? Again, have that confidence to knock on doors. And if they reject your hand, if you think the work is really good, write a letter to complain and say, I think this is good. Can you have another look?
Yes.
Be stubborn. Be stubborn. Yeah.
Yes, be stubborn. We were chatting. I'll just so that our participants here, you've touched on what I was lamenting about. Sometimes as African researchers, we are not known by the editors in chief, the editorial board. So be stubborn and reach out to them so that you are known. So there were questions about how do I use AI in my writing? Can a non-medical person write medical pieces? So I'll encourage you, Prof. I know you are very busy and I know it's late at night where you are at, but may you kindly go through the chat and try to address all the remaining questions. I saw at least how should I use AI when I'm writing?
Yeah.
So at this juncture, allow me to thank you. I've truly, truly been challenged and I am a hard worker on the ground in the clinic, but you've challenged me to change my thinking in terms of publication. And I'm always talking about decolonization of health research in Africa. And we cannot just decolonize without changing the way we come up with ideas for research, how we do the research, how we publish. So Africa, a luta continua, we will get
Victoria
there.
Sata, as we say.
Victory is certain for Africans. We are going to get there. So thank you so much, Prof. Please stay around. And as we move on to the second session, I'll invite the facilitators for the next session to take this up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mgoji. Thanks everyone for listening and engaging with the questions. I will answer some of them before I go to bed.
Thank you.
Thank you once again. So it's the top of the hour, and now we are at the oral abstract presentation sections. Behind every abstract is a real researcher who has labored over data collection, wrestled with ethical approvals, navigated institutional obstacles, and dared to submit their work for public scrutiny. In this session, we're going to be listening to 5 of such researchers, and then it's going to be a rapid fire format of 3 minutes each per researcher. So please feel free to use the Q&A sessions for your questions. And this first session is, the theme of this abstract presentation session is health systems, clinical competence, and service delivery. Our first abstract we'll be taking is titled Knowledge, Attitude, and Practice of Vital Signs Assessment Among Medical Students in Nigeria. To be taking us that presentation is Mr. Amir Yahaya.
Good day. Please, can I share my screen, please?
Yes, please. You may go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. This is my screen visible.
Yes, it is. You may just put it on
All right.
slideshow so it's bigger.
All right. So all right. So, do I need to on my video or that won't be necessary?
So can we have your slide in slideshow so it's bigger for us all to see?
All right. I'm unable to turn on my video. Or should I proceed like that?
Please go ahead.
All right. So, good day, everyone. I am Amir Yahya, and on behalf of the Internal Medicine Textbook of Nigeria, I'll be talking on vital sign assessment and medical students. So, Nigeria produces thousands of doctors yearly. Yet, most clinical medical students learn vital sign assessment by tradition, like by observing the way it has been done, whether it is right or wrong, not by actual structured training. So, the question here is that: are we graduating observers or practitioners? So here's the gap. Vital sign assessment are the first warning or the first warning of patient deterioration. Yet most studies report a dangerous gap in the knowledge and practice of vital sign assessment. What it is saying is that both students and medical practitioners they know what to do about vital sign assessment, but they don't do it. So this coupled with the limited healthcare resources in Nigeria could have serious implications. So the core question here is that does knowledge actually drive practice or is something else at work? So to answer this short question, we conducted a nationwide cross-sectional survey involving 400 clinical medical students across Nigeria. The knowledge, attitude, and practice was assessed through MCQ and 4-point likelihood question. So then we look at the key tension. Does knowledge actually predict doing? Well, our data says no. Our findings include 97% of the individuals of the clinical medical students have good knowledge, while 57.5% have good attitude, while only 17% have good practice. Let this sink in for a minute. More than half of the clinical medical students want to do the right thing. They want to assess vital signs, but only 1 out of 6 actually go ahead and do it. This is actually more depressing if you think about the fact that 80% of these clinical students have attended rotation in internal medicine and surgery, yet 83% still show poor practice. The real killer here is actually the fact that knowledge showed no statistically significant correlation with practice. However, attitude was strongly correlated with practice. What this is telling us is that knowledge does not equal competence, attitude does. So this doesn't seem like much if you look at it in isolation. So when I had to ask about what are the reasons for this poor practice, about 50% reported that it is due to time constraint during clinical rotation. This is more like a subjective issue. There's nothing much you can do about it. It's more about time management. But for the other barriers reported, the lack of equipment, the lack of practice opportunity, the insufficient supervision and guidance, and the inadequate formal training, these are actually systemic issue. And with the limited healthcare resources in Nigeria, this is more than just a classroom problem. This can translate into actual patient risk crisis. So our recommendation for this is that passive observation of vital sign assessment should be replaced with observe vital sign assessment checks league in ward round, and vital sign assessment should be inculcated into OSCE station. They should be stimulation based skills lab should be established. Each lab and ward should be equipped with proper equipment, and refresher workshops should be made available for both students and practitioners as attitude drive practice, not knowledge. So the take-home message here is that Nigerian medical students, they are willing, they have their heart, they want to do the right thing, but without structured, observed, and guided practice, good attitude alone will translate into safe, competent care. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. So we're going to take all of them before we take your questions. The second abstract is from Frederick Ntirenganya, and it's titled Determinants of Health-Related Quality of Life Among People Living with HIV in Rwanda, a cross-sectional study. And to take us, it's Frederick Ntirenganya.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Welcome to Mentors Drives Quality of Life in People Living with HIV presentation. Even if the allow effective antiretroviral therapy, many people living with HIV continue to experience difference in their perceived quality of life. However, it remains unclear whether physical or mental health plays a greater role in shaping these perceptions. In this study, we assessed the association between physical and mental health physical and mental health domain and the overall quality of life among these adults receiving antiretroviral therapy in the country. This cross-sectional study enrolled adult 1,208 people living with HIV of 12 facilities, including 5 hospitals and 7 facilities, using the tool of let's get to start here. I need a video. Okay. Thank you. I forgot to put on the video. Can I restart, please? Hello?
Yes, you can.
Can I restart?
Okay, that's fine. Just start from the beginning. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to this mental health drives quality of life in people living with HIV. Even if they allow effective antiretroviral therapy, many people living with HIV continue to experience difference in their perceived quality of life. And however, it remains unclear whether physical or mental health plays a greater role in shaping this perception. In this study, we assessed the association between physical and mental health domain and the overall quality of life among adults receiving antiretroviral therapy in Rwanda, using cross-sectional study in 1,208 people living with HIV of 12 health facilities across the country. We found that 10-point increase in mental health score lead to 23% reduction in poor quality of life, which means mental health is a strong prediction of quality of life. And every unity improvement in mental well-being dramatically improves perceived quality of life for these people living with HIV. And this implies that mental health screening and support should be integrated into routine HIV care to maximize the well-being of these people. For the physical health, we found that physical score has a limiting variability from their median and range score. But despite this good physical health of medication and perceived quality of life is probably driven by this mental health state. And the people living with HIV may experience good physical health. This is just the insight of the implication, but still feel diminished quality of life if mental health is still poor. And current measure of physical health may not capture what matters most to patients than mental health. And with the recommendation, there is a need to integrate integrate psychological assessment into all clinical visits, counseling, therapy, and peer support groups, and track mental health outcome alongside their viral load. And this study supports that 85% people living with HIV reported good quality of life, meaning there is a good intervention, intervention be effective. And also the mental health is a modifiable risk factor with proven interventions. If we can improve or strengthen the mental health, or integrate the mental health in the health care, we will have to prove good intervention. And physical status alone is insufficient to ensure patients' well-being of these people living with HIV. Take home, it seems that the hidden key to quality of life is the mental health, and integrating mental support into HIV care to improve quality of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just to remind us, we are on the oral abstract presentations, and this session is titled Health Systems, Clinical Competence, and Service Delivery. We've had the first abstract, we've had the second abstract, and now the third abstract is going to be taken by Taiwo Dosumu, and it's titled Factors Influencing Willingness to Implement Newborn Screening for Sickle Cell Disease Among Nurses and Midwives in Selected Hospitals in Oyo State. And it's going to be taken by Taiwo Dosumu.
Thank you so much.
So you can put it on slideshow, and maybe you could mute your second device so that it's clear we can hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Mrs. Dosumu, sorry, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, please?
Yes. Okay, yes, so we can hear from the one without the video, yes.
Yes.
So you can lower the second one, that's fine.
Yes, please, I've done that. Sorry about that. My name is Taiwo Dosumu.
So there's still an echo. You need to reduce the volume of the second one.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. It's 2 a.m. in a busy.
Okay, Mrs. Dosumu, sorry, we'll have to take you next. Let's take the next one, and then we'll take you after we've taken the last speaker, so that you can just get the technical, get it right. I think there's still the echo. So we'll go to the fourth presentation before us, and we're still on the health systems, clinical competence, and service delivery. The fourth is going to be taken by Jessica Dalhatu, and is titled Learning Styles, Preferred Teaching Methods, and Academic Performance Among Physiotherapy Students in a Nigerian University. And this is going to be taken by Jessica Dalhatu.
Good day, sir.
Yes, you're welcome. Go ahead.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Good day, everyone. When I was a physiotherapy student, my classmates and I lived in two worlds. The first was the lecture hall, with hours of spoken words, pages of text, trying to picture the human body from words on a slide. The second world was the clinic, with real patients, real equipment, real life. But when we moved from the lecture room into the clinic, something strange happened. We had the theory, we had the equipment, yet standing over a patient recovering from a stroke, our minds went completely blank. We were drowning in the gap between hearing about a movement and actually performing it on a human body. And that's when I realized that the brain must see what the hand must do. Physiotherapy isn't a podcast you listen to. It is something that you see, feel, and do. You cannot master how the shoulder moves just by hearing someone describe it. Our hands could not fix what our minds could not capture. And that is because the brain must see what the hand must do. I needed to know if we were alone. So I asked all 131 physiotherapy students in my study, how do you learn? And do you think that this method helps you succeed? What they told me should change how every classroom in Africa operates. 83.2% of them rely on one way of learning, one door, through which information must enter, otherwise it doesn't enter at all. Nearly half of them were visual learners. They need to see it in the form of videos, diagrams, detailed images, and so on. Without that, it doesn't stick. But here's what shook me. When I asked if their learning style matched how well they felt they were doing academically, the visual learners said loud and clear, yes, this works for me. They felt like they were succeeding because they could see what they needed to learn. Think about it. Future healers telling us directly, when I can see it, I'm winning. When I only hear it, I'm lost. If we keep teaching mainly through lengthy lectures, we leave half our students feeling unprepared before they touch their first patient because the brain must see what the hand must do. Now, this isn't about money. It's a design problem. And the thing with design problems is that it doesn't require million naira budgets. All it requires is someone to say, we're going to do things differently now. Now, I have three changes, all at zero cost, that we can implement. Number one is see it first. We have to stop seeing diagrams, images, and videos like bonus materials while teaching. They are the main course. They are not the side dish. Before students hear about a concept, let them see it first. Number two is discovery time. The students in my study said loud and clear that they prefer to learn by figuring things out themselves. They want to try, fail, adjust, and try again. We need to protect that time in our clinical schedules because that is where true learning lives. Number three is knowing who are teaching. So I recommend that lecturers take 15 minutes at student intake by performing a simple test to help them understand their class better. This study involved 131 physiotherapy students in one Nigerian university. In the landscape of global research, this is a small step. But the truth that they shared belongs to every single one of us in this virtual room. We are asking Africa's youth to restore human dignity with their hands, and they are ready. They are sitting in our lecture halls right now, and they are waiting. But we cannot ask them to build a world-class healthcare system while we teach them with methods that leave them lost and unheard. The students have already told us what works, and now it is our choice to do something. If we already know how they learn best, then what is stopping us from teaching them with these methods? Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Thank you for that presentation. We'll be taking the next one titled Evaluation of Sexually Transmitted Infections Surveillance System in Gakenke District, Rwanda. And to be taking us on this is Cyprian Nyonsenga, Evaluation of Sexually Transmitted Infection Surveillance System in Gakenke District, Rwanda, by Cyprian Nyonsenga.
Thank you. Let me share the screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's fine.
Thanks a lot. A surveillance system that only reports numbers without action cannot effectively control STI. we found that more than 1 million killable STI occur globally every day. And in 2024, 3,433 STI cases were reported in Gakenke district, one district of Rwanda. However, there was no district-level surveillance system that was evaluated. This evaluation therefore aims at evaluating surveillance system attributes, function, and as well as developing actionable recommendations. From the method, surveillance system was evaluated by using CDC surveillance system evaluation guidelines. It has been conducted in 3 district hospitals and 13 health centers, where we used the HMIS and facility data, which was collected for the year 2024, and we mainly interviewed 94 healthcare providers. The evaluation assessed is the fullness, accessibility, timeliness, completeness, and stability part of the attributes. The performance was categorized as poor and very good. As you can see from STI surveillance findings, most people were willing to continue using the system, and the completeness of the data was at 21%, acceptability and timeliness. From the critical gap observed, the facilities with trained data managers was only 6%, laboratory confirmation rate were at 19%, quarterly feedback and the use of data for decision making was very low. From STI surveillance system, it is reporting oriented rather than decision driven, data driven. We can see we found that 88% of the data were complete, but only 41% were able to use the data for decision making. 81% of the data were reported on timely basis, but however, 20% was able to receive quarterly feedback. On the acceptability part, 94% of the providers were rated acceptability as favorable. However, only 90% of the STI was able to be confirmed by laboratory. The system stability was weakened by frequent stockout of the reporting forms. A surveillance system matters when the data guides actions. Priority action for strengthening the STI surveillance system, strengthening routine quarterly feedback at all facilities, and it is recommended that to train facility level data managers so as to report the data accurately, and to improve data analysis and interpretation skills. And it is also recommended to develop a pilot sentinel laboratory confirmation site, transforming the system from reporting into decision for effective STI control is better. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we have just one more before we take our questions and our comments. And we're going to be inviting to take us on the third abstract, factors influencing willingness to implement newborn screening for SCD among nurses and midwives in selected hospitals in Oyo State. And it's going to be taken by Taiwo Dosumu.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the technical issue. I've been trying so hard from my hand here. I will quickly share my slide. Please, can you all see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Once again, I apologize for the technical issue. My name is Taiwo Dosumu, and I will be presenting factors influencing willingness to implement newborn screening for sickle cell disease among nurses and midwives in selected hospitals in Oyo State. Sometimes ago, in a busy maternity ward, a healthy-looking baby was delivered to family, and baby was discharged home after. The family celebrated because everything seems fine. But after a while, after a few months, baby came down with fever, with overwhelming infection, and the family started moving from one hospital to the other. not knowing that the baby had sickle cell disease. By the time the diagnosis was made, baby had already come down with some complications. In another scenario, a family delivered a baby and in the busy maternity ward, and baby had newborn screening for sickle cell disease, was promptly referred to health facilities for follow-up, and management to care for the baby was instituted immediately. Sickle cell disease is a genetic blood disorder, and it affects millions of people worldwide. More than 300,000 babies are delivered yearly worldwide with sickle cell disease, and Africa accounts for about 75% of this. In Nigeria, about 150,000 babies are delivered annually with sickle cell disease, and this is estimated to increase by 100% by the year 2050. Newborn screening is an approach that helps with early detection, beyond early detection, initiation of babies born with sickle cell disease into comprehensive care, where appropriate management, parental education, and guidance is done. Early detection and intervention is very key and very important in managing sickle cell disease. This study thereby examined the attitude and factors that may affect nurses and midwives' willingness to implement newborn screening for sickle cell disease in selected hospitals in Oyo State. A cross-sectional research design was conducted among nurses and midwives, and these facilities were purposefully selected in Oyo State. Sample size was determined using the Tariyamani formula for known population, and data was collected using a structured self-administered questionnaire. Ethical approval was gotten from Oyo State's Ministry of Health, and nurses and midwives' consent taken prior to the study. Findings from this study revealed that 95 nurses and midwives participated in the study. Most of the nurses and midwives, about more than 70% of them, had positive attitude towards newborn screening for sickle cell disease, but greater than 60% of them indicated lack of training, inadequate resources, time constraints, workload pressure as major factors that may influence their involvement in the implementation of newborn screening for sickle cell disease. Hence, continuous education, policy support can help and enhance nurses and midwives' capacity in order to advocate for newborn screening for sickle cell disease, basically to reduce mortality and morbidity as a result of sickle cell disease in our society. Thank you so much for listening. These are some of my references. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Taiwo Dosumu. Yeah, so we'll listen to these first 5 abstracts on health systems, clinical competence, and service delivery. And then if you remember all what we're trying to do, we are amplifying African scholarship. We want our voices to be heard. And we have seen from research amongst medical students, amongst physiotherapy students, among nurses and midwives in Oyo State, amongst people living with HIV in Rwanda. We've seen different studies conducted in these places, and we're trying to hear and amplify our voices so that we can make our data seen. And one thing that's kept flowing through the thread of all of these different studies we've seen is that I think for 2 of them, one of the things they said was that we needed more data-driven policies. And that reminds us of what we had in the first lecture, the keynote lecture. So it's not just to have, our voices should be heard, and we should have decisions based on our data. Another very important thing we've seen is that for the presentation we had on the physiotherapy students, their voices were heard, the students. So the recommendation that the presenter was making is that since we have heard what they are saying, why don't we give it to them what they want? So at this point, I would just like to take some of the few comments or take some of the questions we might have. There's a question on the Q&A for the presenter on mental health for people living with HIV. So there's a question that says there was not much description on the methodology. What domains of instruments or participant characteristics, and how did you do the sampling, and what eligibility criteria did you use? Also the study sites, gender and age, and treatment duration effect. So there's a whole lot in that, but I think maybe a little bit more explanation on the methodology. That's what the question is asking. So I'll leave it over to you, Mr. Frederick. So did you get the question, Mr. Frederick? A little bit more explanation or description on your instruments, your participant characteristics, and other details about your methodology. Okay, let me check if we still have him here. Mr. Frederick, you are muted, so you can unmute yourself.
I had an internet issue. Can you please repeat the question? Sorry.
Okay, so it's a question on the methodology. So someone is asking, they need a little bit more description on the domains of your instruments, the participants' characteristics, including eligibility, sampling, and gender, age, and treatment duration effect. So maybe what you can just do, maybe you can recap your methodology and give a little bit more detail. We understand it was just a rapid fire session. You try to break it down within the limits of the time, but you could just give a little bit more explanation on your methods. So did you get that? You're muted, Mr. Frederick.
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, for the methodology, what we did is we explored the quality of life among people living with HIV using a medical outcome study, HIV health survey. And the questionnaire was evaluated for health related quality of life through 2 summary dimensions. What are those 2 summary dimensions? There was physical health and mental health summary. And this data was administered by using a questionnaire and medical system record, capturing demographic characteristics and disease-related informations. And this tool, we grouped them into physical health score and mental health score domain. And we made sure non-numeric response were converted into numeric values, and the missing values were replaced with the median for each variable. And then this summary score, either physical health or mental health, were computed by summing the corresponding item. And the quality of life was dichotomized to make them binary into good score, which was greater or equal to 3, and the poor score, which was less than 3. And we used logistic regression model just to examine the association between physical health survey and the mental health survey with a binary variable we had, which is quality of life. That's what we did. I think that's...
All right, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So there's a question for the last presenter, that's Taiwo Dosumu. The question says, why selecting the group of midwives and nurses as the study population in assessing factors impacting on sickle cell disease? So why did you select a group of midwives and nurses as the study population in assessing the factors impacting on sickle cell disease?
Thank you very much for the question. Nurses and midwives have been identified as important stakeholders, especially in the implementation of universal newborn screening. And usually, nurses and midwives are always at the point of care when dealing with pregnant women from the point of antenatal care to delivery to postnatal, even immunization, because these are avenues where newborn screening for sickle cell disease can be conducted. And that's why this particular population, and we are from literature, little have been done in regards to health personnel, especially nurses and midwives. And it's important that we empower this population because they are always at the points, especially when dealing with this particular population. The newborn, the pregnant women, the newly delivered mothers, and that's why we decided to explore factors that can affect their involvement in newborn screening for sickle cell disease. Because even during antenatal, we realized that nurses and midwives give health education to pregnant women, and it's an avenue to tell them about newborn screening prior to when they delivered. And that's the reason for the choice of this population. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, and someone also has added to that, saying that just like you have explained, nurses and midwives are frontline workers, and so they're the ones who most times have to implement this newborn screening. So thank you for that clarification. There's a question from Oluyinka, which says, when determining sample, okay, I think this is a comment. Okay, it's a question. So it says, when determining sample size adequacy, the Yamani formula is only used to determine the generalizability of the results to the population, but not to determine the adequacy of the participants for the current study. So it's asking, the question is, do you have enough participants to determine any significant effect for your study based on the number of variables or model complexity, the time and resources, the nature of the research questions? Okay, so I think the first comment is noted about the Yamani formula for determining generalizability. Let me take, there's another comment here which I'll just read out. I think it's still on, which borders down to, it's the same, it's from the last question we also had that was answered. It says, I suggest a need to look at nurses and midwives training curriculum to ensure the general non-public concerns are taken care of in the training schools, but also to have a schedule for CMEs to keep all at speed with current practices. Yeah, so again, we're looking at learning models, we're looking at health workers. Remember, this is looking at health systems, and the health workforce is a very important part of the health system. So we need to ensure that they are properly trained. Okay, so I think there's another question which, so those are the questions we have for now. Do we have, I don't know if I've missed out anyone, I'm looking through. There's one more, someone is just complimenting all the presenters, saying he or she enjoyed all the abstract presentations and that the way each presenter started differs. So these are pitching sessions. So you're pitching your idea in the process of amplifying your voice. You are pitching your ideas, pitching what you have done to, as a matter of practicalizing what we have heard, practicalizing the fact that we have a voice, we have a story to tell, and we're telling our stories in our own unique ways. Okay, so at this point, I would just like to ask if we have any of our panelists. Maybe you have one or two questions, or you have one or two comments to make on any of the 5 presentations we have had. Before I ask my own question. Okay, so in the absence of that, for the first presenter, it was an interesting presentation, and I know because of the time you spoke, it was a fast one, just like we said, it's a rapid fire assessment. Now you mentioned that knowledge was not related with the practice, but it was more of attitude. So does that also mean that the knowledge and the attitude, is there any relationship between them? In the sense, I don't know if you had to look at something like that, or you just saw that, okay, their knowledge was not directly related to the way they practiced. Did you also see anything related with, did their knowledge also affect the way the attitudes they had, or their attitudes were independent of the knowledge they had on vital signs assessment? So that's
Right,
just for you.
right. Well, thank you very much for that question. Yes, I think the knowledge and the attitude were also not statistically significant. The only statistically significant association from the study was between the attitude and the practice. So,
Okay, all right, that's fine. So I'll just ask, because some questions were not asked, so I will ask I really enjoyed the third, or I think the fourth presentation that became the third one on learning styles, preferred teaching methods, and academic performance among physiotherapy students in the Nigerian university. Now, maybe I'll just ask two questions. So the first one I'm going to ask, in your conclusion, one of the things you said was that visual learning was the dominant modality associated with was the most dominant one as found, if I got that right, and that you are suggesting that curricula emphasizing visual instructional strategies may support improved educational outcomes. So my question is this: apart from I know you dwelt more on visual learning, right? But your topic says learning styles, preferred teaching methods, and academic performance among physiotherapy students in a Nigerian university. So I'd just like to know, out of curiosity, to find out, apart from the visual learning which you found out, what were the next common ones, next dominant after the visual learning? What again did you was noticed amongst your findings? And if there were other important things, how do you want us to, do you have any things to say about that? So that's for Jessica Dalhatu.
Okay. Please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So from my results, yes, majority of the participants were visual learners. The second highest were kinesthetic learners, which means that they thrive more of practice and doing it themselves than seeing it or just listening to it, followed by the auditory. So auditory learners were the minority in this case. So taking this information, what I would encourage most is in every classroom, my results might differ from the results that will come out of a normal, like a different classroom. So I would encourage lecturers to perform a simple VAC test to know the distribution of learners within their classroom to help them structure their learning plan.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I think there's one more question. So still on for you, Jessica, somebody was asking for a little bit more examples. Say the presentation on the physiotherapy curriculum, the scientist storytelling was amazing. So complementing your presentation. Okay, I think this is just a comment complementing your presentation. Okay. So we'll be ending this in the next 5 minutes, but before we do that, I see more questions are coming up. I'll just take two more and then we can end it so that we can have a short break before we take the last session for today. For the medical students assessment, okay, so someone just needs to clarify how generalizable your findings are. What was your sample? I think you mentioned that. Maybe you just want to clarify again what was the sample size, and maybe you can speak on the generalizability of your findings. So I guess
Yes,
that's for Mr. Amir Yahaya.
yes, sir. Thank you very much for that question. So, for generalizability of our findings, in particular, this is a pilot survey. So, like we didn't have the resources to actually conduct a, let's say, structured nationwide survey. But still, in pilot survey, we made several approaches to actually make sure that it is representative. We recruited participants from each of the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria to help in data collection. So yes, like the data we were able to receive about like 500, almost 600 responses, but like only 400 were variable, and only 400 were variable, and among the responses received, like mostly, they are mostly from the south. About 70% were from the south, the 3 geopolitical zones in the south, while the others from the north, and the north itself, particularly the northeast, wasn't adequately represented. I think there are limited, almost maybe just about 4 participants from Northeast. So, like, yes, this is a pilot survey. So we would like to encourage more people to actually invest in actually conducting a proper nationwide survey. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes, I'm interested in finding out something for the speaker on evaluation of sexually transmitted infections surveillance system in Gakenke district, Rwanda. That's for Cyprian. I think you're still here with us. One of the things that struck me when you spoke, you said that most of the surveillance system is more reporting oriented rather than data driven. And because I know that I do some surveillance work too, and I know that many times people always like to just tick boxes of what was done. Maybe when there are deadlines, you just need to tick boxes, and rather than being so. My question is this: if you say that it's more reporting oriented rather than data driven, maybe you may want to further explain what you mean by that, because reporting, you're talking about data. When you're reporting, data is coming out. All right. So if you're saying it's reporting oriented rather than data driven, maybe you want to explain what you mean by that. And also tell us how some of this, because you said strengthening feedback mechanisms, strengthening the systems, maybe 1 or 2 specific ways. You may want to give us an example. What do you think are the real solutions we should be looking at to better our surveillance systems for STIs, and not just STIs? With this, we can use it to also discuss other infectious diseases and other health conditions in general. So maybe you want to explain about that reporting oriented you talked about, and what ways, how can we specifically better those systems? That's for Cyprian.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. While evaluating the system, we are asking question if the health facility do reports, and after reporting, they get a feedback from the upper level. Then from getting the feedback, they should have like a meeting to see STI increasing or decreasing. If they are increasing, what should we do? Then we are asking if they are taking decisions based on the findings. Like in a Ahuru report, there was like a period where there were more of the STI cases. Like in May, they had many cases, but they have never taken the decision. They never, based on that, on the cases or the system, to take the decision based on the data. Data are being reported on a monthly basis, but they are not acted upon. They are not taking decisions based on those data. That's where we say the system is report oriented, but not decision driven data. I've not understood the second question. Sorry, I've not got the second question.
Okay, no, it was more of still recommendations. What are your specific solutions? I think it was a little bit generalize the recommendations you gave. So maybe you can just break them down, how these systems can be improved specifically here.
Yeah, the recommendation for this, like other conditions like HIV, TB, and the other hepatitis, those data are being used for decision making. They are heading quarterly meetings to review the data for those diseases, and have recommended that also STI should be acted upon, should be also be considered to be among the conditions to be based on the data for them to take the decisions. When the cases are increasing, they should take decision either to screen or to implement measures to reduce the infections. Thank you. I've worked with the district leaders, and we have agreed on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll just leave it there. I still see one more question here. I think I omitted that. So this is for the presentation on teaching methods. So I think this is a comment about students undergoing tutorials from their senior colleagues, that's in order to cover the syllabus. So it's asking, was there any mention about students undergoing tutorials from their senior colleagues in order to cover the syllabus? Maybe you just want to say something about that, if that has any bearing with what you worked on.
Yes, thank you for the question. Tutorials were listed as part of the teaching methods that we checked for amongst the students. And according to ranking, minority of them liked the idea of undergoing tutorials. What they responded more to was figuring things out themselves, trial and error discovery.
Hello, okay. You're done? All right.
Sorry, sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was saying something. I said try and error discovery. So while tutorials are a very good teaching method, the students that were involved in the study did not have an affinity towards it.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much for that. So once again, I want to we'll be going into the next, before we go to the next session, I want to thank all our speakers. This has been the oral abstract presentation, day one. And what we've tried to look at is health systems, clinical competence, and service delivery. And we've seen presentations talking about vital signs assessments, ranking, relating knowledge with practice. We've seen a presentation on quality of life among people living with HIV, and where one of the important things we saw was that mental health is one of the very important factors that affects quality of life among people living with HIV. We looked at factors influencing willingness to implement newborn screening for sickle cell disease among nurses and midwives. We also looked at learning styles, preferred teaching methods amongst physiotherapy students. And then finally, we looked at evaluation of surveillance system for sexually transmitted infections in the District of Rwanda. At this point, we will take a break. But before we take the break, I don't know if we have a word or two from any of our panelists before we go on a 5 minutes break in preparation for the next session for today. Okay, so in the absence of any questions, we'll just have a short, it's a very working, it's a short break, a 5 minute water break. And when we come back, it's something you don't want to miss. So you can stay on the call, just take a glass of water, you can move around, you can stretch your legs. But in the next 5 minutes, once it's 3, we'll be taking a very important topic you don't want to miss. For some of us who have heard him speak before, it's something we are looking forward to. We're going to be having a session by 3 p.m. when we resume. Bye for now.
Okay, Kudus, I'll take the session.
Yeah, thank you very much. And top of the hour, 3 p.m. Kudus Lawal, and I'm going to be facilitating this session. I'm sure it has been an amazing session over the past 2 hours where we've looked at the gaze, how you gaze and how you pose in terms of who you write for and who you are writing at. And that was followed by a very interesting abstract presentation. I'm going to be deepening the conversation on who you write for and how you write in this session. I'm excited about this session in the sense that it's focusing about building capacity and also learning for the participant. I'm sure many of the early career researchers on this call are going to appreciate the importance of this session. So I'm going to dive into the session right away. And to take this session with me is my mentor, my teacher, and my mother. Many people call her my mother. We're going to be having a conversation actually on Dare to Dream, the African Dream. We're going to be looking at how important the data that is generated from Africa is, and how the mindset of Africans in terms of research needs to change to improve the outputs that we have from Africa. I'm sure you all know Professor Morenike, but a little dive into who she is. She is someone that believes in knowledge philanthropy. All that we do in Manuscript Writing Hub is based on her initiative, and she goes all the up to ensure that knowledge is gotten across Africa, such that the quality of knowledge and papers and manuscripts that originate from Africa is one that can stand the test of time wherever it's taken to, and that is why we're doing what we do. So, Prof, if you are ready, I am ready. Prof, can you hear me? And you're ready?
Kudus, I truly can do this. I'm in a meeting. My internet is bad. Let's see what we
Sorry
can
about
do.
that.
Yes. Let me call a panel together. I see that Tolu is here. Tolu, apologies, it's the last minute. Please, can I call you up and see if we can move you
Yeah, that
up?
would be having here. Yeah.
And then Dr. Ngodi, can you also please join us on this panel to please engage with Dr. Lawal to discuss what it means to dare to dream for Africa and with your history of excellent research. Yes. Thank you so much. And thanks for calling you on the last panel. So I'll hand you over to Dr. Porter. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. We asked for one, we're having three. Thank you very much. So I would, if Dr. Godi can come up so that I can see you and the rest of the you. Please confirm that you're on and you can hear me.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Ngodi.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation, and what I'm focusing on in this conversation is the African mindset as regards research and the landmark we're sitting on as African in terms of African data. I was speaking with a colleague of mine who works in the States, and he told me point blankly that, Kudus, you guys are sitting on gold mine, yet you complain. He said the data from Africa, if harnessed, if made use of, can actually change the fortune of Africa. And I was starting with you, Dr. Ngodi. What do you think of that thought of my friend, that Africa is sitting on gold mine? Do you agree with that, my friend?
Yes, I agree with your friend. It would have been good to know his name. But Africa, really, we are sitting on a gold mine in terms of we've got the researchers. We are able to do the work. We are well trained. It's just that maybe we are not given the opportunity to showcase ourselves. I'll talk about myself, for example. I've been in this business for 20 years. I started off as a junior doctor, just doing the work in the clinic, the work. But I rose to be a PI. I'm now in charge of huge cohorts. One of my biggest studies was conducted across 4 continents Africa, the United States, Latin America, and Europe. So we are there, we are very good. We just need to be given the opportunity to showcase ourselves, and we can do it. But unfortunately, I think sometimes we are backbenchers. Sometimes maybe we are not assertive enough to say, yes, I can do this. I'm well trained and I'm capable of doing this. We need to be given the platform. And that said, I'll call out to the African governments. It's time, because sometimes we are just relying on funding from the West. As a result, maybe I'm not overall in charge of the data or of the research agenda. So if I was having funding from Zimbabwe, for example, I'll be overall in charge. So this is a call out. It's a call to action for our African governments. They must be funding in-country research. We need sustainable domestic financing for research. That way we can truly own our data. We can truly own our research. And we do research for Africa by Africans in Africa. So your friend, I've taken a long-winded way, but your friend really was right in that we are sitting on a gold mine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'll take it from what you mentioned, take me to Dr. Sion. You mentioned that if given the opportunity, Africans can do a lot. But the question I'm going to ask is, nobody gives opportunity. The Western would permit me to use that word, are enjoying the situation we have currently, where they just bring us in to get some stuff done for them, rather than collaborators in research and doing research for Africans. Do you think our northern colleagues are going to? Oh yeah. So we have our speaker on the call. So I guess we're going to have a bigger panel now. Welcome, Ifedayo.
Thank you for having me. Sorry I'm a little late. I was trying to get into the Zoom link, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Network, but the network can be frustrating sometimes, and we're happy that you joined finally. Before you joined, we actually converted to a panel discussion, having some fellow Africans discuss about African research. And I'll still have them speak as it goes on, but let me just focus on you for some time. They also have their contribution in the conversation. Thank you very much and welcome to the call. For those who know Ifedayo, Ifedayo is one of Africa's best. He has been involved in research work that transcends just physics, which he is in primarily, to how you intersection between physical research and how you make the best out of it. Is known for what is done globally and has interacted both in the northern hemisphere as well as the southern hemisphere, and is going to be bringing that to fore in this conversation. As we started, it's going to be more of an interaction between us, going in depth into what Africans need to do to improve the quality of research that comes out of research. And Dr. Gode have already addressed one of the questions that I have about how Africans can make the best of the gold mine that we sit on. And I'm going to take it to Ifeda right away. My question would be the scarcity of data on African population. Yeah, a lot of times we say that there are no African population data when we do research. We say most of the data comes from the northern hemisphere. So looking at this, is this really a limitation of doing a work, or it's actually a gap that can be, maximized and worked on? What would be your take on that?
First of all, thank you for again having me. It's a pleasure to be, on this panel discussion. What I would argue is the fundamental building block of how we build a better Africa. To your question, I think, the paradox of not having data is that there's an opportunity to sort of fill that gap. And so to answer your question specifically, I think it's an advantage. Let me give a very simple example. If I ask you, for example, what is the how many people in the last 2 years in the state of Oshun, for example, were misdiagnosed with malaria, right? It's very likely that there's no data for that, like in a way that is systematic and in a way in which, people that are in that space can uncover that information. And so you can imagine us and imagine building some infrastructure, be it a simple online portal or some partnership with the universities and hospitals. That data itself is publishable, right? And that's a leverage that I think a lot of people, often don't really put onto a higher pedestal. Of course, right? Getting the data is a challenge in of itself, right? But the data itself, when collecting it, right? Even if the writing and the argument isn't robust, journals would be more than willing to publish that data, right? Because it's just something that fills in the landscape, right? And so this is a simple example. I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit deeper, but it's a simple example of how the gold mine that African scholars and scientists sit on can be is untapped and something that we definitely need to sort of do more of. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I'll be bringing Dr. Ngodi back on the call and also want to follow up on the last comment she made, talking about Africans not getting the opportunity to express themselves. Dr. Ngodi, please, are you still on the call? Yeah. So, picking on of that, I think African researchers do not necessarily want to stay behind as backbencher, but because they lack infrastructure, funding, and institutional support to carry out research. So, given the experience, years of experience you have doing clinical trials, I'd like to know what will you say about designing credible and rigorous research within this context of low or lack of resources. Dr. Ngodi.
Sorry, I was my network fell off a bit. What do I think about designing research in what setting?
Yeah, so I am picking up on from where you stopped the last time about Africans being backbenchers in research. And I mentioned that some of the factors responsible for that may be the fact that there are no infrastructure, funding, and institutional support to carry out research. So given this situation, how do you think Africans can come up with credible and rigorous data within this same context?
So I think it's also important. I know it's very important to have South-to-South collaboration, but as we work on our infrastructure as Africans, we must take cognizance of the fact that we still, at times, we need North-South-North collaboration. So at times, we need to get in touch with collaborators in the global north so that they assist us to build capacity. And even in mentorship, we need to have mentorship triangles: a scholar in the global south, a mentor in the global south, and a mentor in the global north. So at this stage, it's going to take a long time to really make sure that Africa is an autonomous continent because we at times we don't have the infrastructure that we need. So but there are also, I'm Zimbabwean, and then I look right next door. South Africa has got a lot of infrastructure, so we can also leverage on the south to south collaboration if there is no infrastructure in your locality. So I'm urging our scholars to leverage on any collaboration that is. If there is south to south, that will be my first option. But if there cannot be south to south collaboration, then we can look up north and say south north collaboration. But at the end, even when I am working on protocols, most of the protocols that I've worked on, and the Research Council of Zimbabwe is very strict about this. One of the questions they are always asking me when I submit a protocol, they will say, yes, it's funded by the Global North. But what is in it for you, for me? What is in it for Zimbabwe? So I must demonstrate that there's capacity building for me as an individual, for my team, the nurses, the counselors, the pharmacists, the lab scientists. I need to see capacity building. But what about the infrastructure? So when we are shipping our specimens to the Global North for certain elaborate tests, we must always make sure that the end game is for Zimbabwe or Africa to be able to do those in country. So we must also hold our funders in the Global North accountable. What is it that you are going to do for us? Of course, we are generating data for Africa from Africans, but it will be used globally. We also need to ensure that Africa is capacitated in the process.
Thank you very much. So, lack of funding on infrastructure is not a reason to do a study or research that is not credible. Collaboration is key. North-South collaboration, South-South collaboration, and making our funders accountable, because African data should be used for African and to improve Africa. Working in the global north. Yeah,
I just wanted to briefly comment on Doctor's points, if I may, if you don't mind. So I
was
think
coming
that,
to you on that. Right.
Yeah. So I think so many of the points you brought up was very thoughtful, and some of it which I agree with. But what I want to caution us on is mystifying the term infrastructure, right? And the reason why I want to do that is because, of course, when we think about, let's say, sending samples for, let's say, something like a screening or blood sample of testing, trying to see if there's certain antibodies and so forth, right? Of course, those types of infrastructure, right, are much more require a different level of skill sets, right? But when I think about the fundamentals and the foundation of data collection, for me, the infrastructure is not groundbreaking, right? In other words, let's say you wanted to collect data in Nigeria, right? Something as simple as building a website and sending that link to a community that you're trying to serve, right? That is infrastructure, right? It's not the infrastructures of the North, of course, where it's all elaborate, but there are tools that can equal the playing field very quickly. There's things, for example, if you're in the field of behavioral economics, if you're in the field of physics, if you're in the field of botany, right? So I want to caution us in thinking that the infrastructure that we needs to be groundbreaking for us to get rolling on collecting certain class of data. And then the doc has, she spoke very eloquently about the self-reliance that we need to build towards, right? And I think, part of that is something maybe we'll discuss a little bit more, but, there are schemes by which, practicing scholars and mentees can travel to the global north for in order to acquire certain skill sets and certain abilities to build certain things, and then come back to the south and replicate those things, right? And so that requires a little bit more of a collaboration. But I think, but my main point is that we have enough to start building our data sets and our data banks.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the infrastructure we need to kind of close the gap is not groundbreaking. There are tools that we can maximize and make use of within what is within our setting. No doubt it may not be at the setting of what is available in the global north, but we can make do with what we have to, close the gap. Thank you for that. So I'll follow
So
up
if
on
I,
this conversation talking about publishing.
sorry, if I
Oh,
might there.
go ahead, Ma.
So I think also and thank you for that comment. I think one of the weaknesses of us biomedical scientists is that sometimes we forget that there is soft science. So we don't need a lot of elaborate infrastructure for soft science. So yes, I totally agree with that. I think I'd really just zoned into the biomedical basic scientific research where we are looking at elaborate labs and pharmaceuticals, but I totally agree with that comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Prof. So I'll be going into publishing and getting the findings of African research and African data available to the global world, the the global community, getting to know what's the quality of work we do in Africa and knowing the data that emanates from Africa. This is oftentimes a challenge for Africans, especially early career researchers. I will be asking Ifedayo first. How do you encourage early career researchers to identify journals that will see African data as being valuable rather than something on the periphery? How do you ensure that African data is published in such a way that it speaks to its importance rather than something on the periphery that is placed towards the end of an issue?
Yeah, this is a very powerful question. It's powerful because we can't understand publication, science, innovation, society without understanding the discourse of power, right? And the politicization of knowledge, right? So let me sort of make that a little bit more clear what I mean. When you think about, I'm a physicist, but I interface a lot with a lot of biologists, and of course I try to read as much as I can. When you think about the disease, for example, that are funded in the U.S., for example, a lot of those diseases are diseases that affect people of Anglo-Saxon descent, white people, right? Cancer, right? Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Not to say that they don't affect people outside of different racial, backgrounds. And so, if you were of a particular group, of course, you would fund the things that affect your group. And of course, if you wanted to create a perception of intellect, of innovation among your group, you would also give opportunities to those within the group. Of course, it's a very visceral and a very primordial way to structure society, but that's what we see, right? And it transcends publication, it transcends a lot of different things. But let me sort of go a little bit more in a positive or in a more productive direction. One of the things, and I'm going to use sickle cell as an example. Sickle cell is one of those diseases or one of those genetic mutations that affect, people of sub-Saharan Africa and Africans. And so I think it's about placing the African concern or the African question at the center of one's research, right? And being bold and being unapologetic about that, right? I think that's the first step, right? The second step is sort of finding those overlaps. So what I mean is, you know, no no phenomenon happens in isolation or in a vacuum. And so it's about finding strategic and tactical ways to situate the question and set the stage in a way where it has interests to the people in the global north and to other diseases that may overlap, right? And so I think it's about understanding the way the game is set up, but then strategically positioning yourself in a way where the things that affect the African system or people or society or biology or worldview, right? You can share overlaps with the things that the North is concerned with. I can give more. I can give other examples, but I think that's the crux of that's the the overview or the higher version, higher level version of one strategy, and also again understanding the way the game is structured.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm still here. I hope what I was saying.
Sorry, my network. Yeah. So if you've raised some important points, and I'm sure the listeners have actually taken some from what you've shared. Africans' research are valuable, and we need to start publishing our data um, globally for the world to make use of it. Thank you very much. You are okay. Please confirm that you can still hear me. You seem to have frozen.
I can still hear you. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. So I would quickly move to the next question I have for you. What we are doing is engaging in conversation about the mindset of Africans about research, and also speaking about African data, which I mentioned at the beginning. It's a gold mine, which the federal also alluded to, and we need to make the best. Sorry about that. My network went off, but I'm sure you can hear me now.
We can hear you now. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah. So Dr. Ngodi mentioned this. Yes, I can. Dr. Ngodi mentioned this at the beginning of the conference, talking about publication by African, the peer review process, the time to publication. There seems to be an inequity in terms of the access to publication, in terms of review process, in terms of access to publishing. What will be your take on that? Do you really agree that there is a disparity? And how do you think that can be addressed by Africans?
Please confirm you can hear me. But you can hear me now. Yeah. I think, I'm not sure you heard the last response that I gave, but because of the network. And I would love to connect with you after this conference and set you up in a way where your network will be consistent for future conferences, either if I'm a part of it or not. I think that's an easy fix. But as far as your question, you can't understand science and publication or anything in a vacuum, I think. You know, um, recently I have been interacting more with scientists and researchers in Africa. And I must admit, right, especially the upcoming researchers, I'm very shocked by the perception of what it takes to publish, let's say, in a high impact journal, or what it takes to publish research that is worth reading, right? And so I think that is not the fault of our younger up and coming scientists, but the erosion of the institution that's nurturing these minds. As you know, right, I'm privileged enough to have a working and robust and honest relationship with Professor Morenica. And, in our conversations, one of the things that I thought was very profound that she mentioned was how, not all, of course, but, in certain parts of educational leadership, let's say in Nigeria, you found a lot of the leadership are reproducing themselves. And of course, it's not it's an open secret, right, that leadership is part of one of the most uh, um, the African leadership is flawed in many ways, right, because of corruption and the value for teachers and professors in science. And so my point is that, on one level, the institutional foundation that's needed for our researchers and scientists to engage in the publication process and the review process is lacking, right? As Doc alluded to, and when I say institution and infrastructure in this sense, I don't mean equipment. I mean the knowledge transfer, and those who have left the continent, the brain drain, right, and now are building the global north, right? Many of them that look like us, and so again, easy fix, but of course, the political and the mental will has to be there. But now go into the actual reality, right? Which is, how do you engage? I think, before I got on this call, where I'm at is in PST. I woke up maybe about 3 or 4 a.m. Um, and what I was doing was reading one of the papers that I'm getting ready to publish. And this is, at least, I would say, the close to 80 plus time I've read this paper, right? So I've read this paper at least 80 times. And what I was doing around this 4 a.m. Mark was reading it again and reanalyzing the data, right? And so there's a particular obsession that I personally have towards making sure that when I publish this thing, I know that I have the Western gaze on me, right? And so I have to be 10 times as good, right? The T's have to all be capitalized if they're supposed to be. And so I think it is that obsession to detail, is that obsession to understanding that you are not a finished product, right? There's a continual, right, constantly getting better, right? And so that is kind of the low hanging fruit that I would give to early researchers, especially in the African continent. Become obsessive with the work. Understand that, you know, don't be too worried about the expediency of publishing, but more of the accuracy, right? And the fact of the matter is that a lot of us, right, are pioneers for African scholarship because we are some of the first to even engage in this sort of environment in a way where it is at international standard. And so, that's sort of what I would say in a nutshell. Sorry, I was a little bit long-winded, but that's like my two-part answer. You know,
Yeah. So one takeaway from what you've said, and I was amazed you've read the paper 80 times. That's remarkable. So you mentioned that you need to be continually obsessive about quality rather than just pushing out the paper,
yeah,
such that whichever gaze at the paper, be it the Western gaze, be it your Southern gaze from Africa, they're not going to find something faulty about your paper. It's going to stand the test of time wherever it's being read. Thank you very much. And I'm sure early career researchers and all researchers on the call are listening to that and going to take a clue from that. The title of this session, once again, is Dare to Dream, and we dream from our mind. And that's why I'll be moving towards the mindset of Africans as it relates to research. But before I go on, I'll call on participants on the call to use the question and answer session to ask questions because it's expected to be a conversation. It's a skill building session. So want your input, and I'll come into the question and answer section to pick your questions and ask if who is surely happy to answer your questions. So there is this mindset we have as African, and myself not excluded. We often talk about the fact that there is no this, no that, scarcity mentality, and that has oftentimes been a limitation of what we can do. We bog ourselves down with the mindset of scarcity. Uh, do you think it's actually a unique strength for us, an opportunity for us to actually drive the African context?
Yeah. Again, you probably already kind of see the tendencies in the way that I ask or answer questions. You see, I am not exactly sure the origins of this particular psychology that we Africans have and black people, but it is something that we have to quickly kill, if you may. What do I mean by that? For some reason, we create correlations or we champion the the behaviors of we champion deviant behaviors more than behave. In other words, like let me simplify this. Most people, for example, when they hear me speak, they say you speak like a white person, right? And what and in some sense, right? Like let's say, for example, I'm with like African Americans, right? That are that my colleagues, right? They'll say you speak too proper, right? And what they're essentially saying is that properness is associated with whiteness, right? Or they say, well, you study physics. What is that, right? Well, why would you study that, right? Because for them, right, again, there's this conjunction between what is superior, what is proper, what is good, right, to whiteness, right? And to me, I've always found it very shocking, right? I never articulated, right? But internally, I find it shocking because my standards have always been the Dr. Lawals of the world. The doctor from Zimbabwe that spoke just now, right? For me, black excellence is the standard. Blackness is the standard. Africanness is the standard. Yeah, of course, like if you look into my background, I was born in London, raised partly in the US, right? I speak that language. But for me, the sense of blackness and Africanness has always been the standard that I have when it comes to, when you look far enough into the history, right? Pre-colonialism, right? And so to be very honest with you, I do not ascribe to that mentality of scarcity, or ascribe to the mentality that the current African now has to sort of accept the faith that those before us had, right? People change, people evolve, right? And so, you know, if the younger generation, right, they don't have that colonial history, right? And so they are probably not going to be as strongly connected to that history, right? And so the point the greater point I want to make is that there are new kinds of history emerging, and those new kinds of history is something that is within our reach to create and associate with, right? That new kind of history is being an African scholar that is rigorous, right? Is the standard, right? Being an African scholar that speaks eloquently or presents well is the standard, right? Of course, right, this is a slightly naive view, right, because I do understand there are external forces, right, beyond the African defining themselves and defining their research, right? But for me, I think that mentality is not something that I personally think is destiny, right? Um, and then to further add on to that, you noted this idea of changing that mentality, and I think part of it is finding like-minded people that you know are oriented in a slightly different way, right? And I think the more and more we create these sorts of communities, right? It's like if I wanted to be, let's say, the best basketball player in the world, I would go and find those that are practicing all the time and those that are working on their skill sets, right? And eventually, right, like, birds of a feather flock together, right? That's some of the one of the proverbs in the Western domain. So that would be kind of the way that I sort of would address that, right? It is rejecting the narrative of the past and really thinking deeply about creating new kinds of futures and new kinds of association, right? For example, I work within the domain of physics, and a lot of the stuff that I publish and a lot of the works that I work on, I always make sure I'm at the center of gravity of whiteness, right? I understand it very much makes a lot of my colleagues angry, right? But that's the new future, right? And so that's what I will say to that.
Yeah, you captured it excellently by saying that there is a new kind of history that is being put together, and we as Africans can associate with. We have just a few more minutes to go, and there are some certain questions I want you to touch on, which I'm sure the early career researchers on the call would like to hear your voice on. So I'll be moving quickly on them, and I want you to touch on them as brief as possible. One concern, talking about mindset and Africans, is that oftentimes early career researchers see rejection as burden that they can barely live with. Uh, Given the level of research you've done, the level of publication you've done, have you experienced rejection, and what was your experience? How did you handle it? And what will you advise the early career researchers on the call on handling rejection?
Yeah, thanks for that question, whoever asked it. I think what you have to do as a person, especially as a black person in the world, um, and as a scholar, right, is get very used to rejection. Like, in fact, you know, let it be kind of like the breakfast that you eat every morning, right? Become so aware, because that's the nature of the the work that you're doing, right? Right. And so I think it is about understanding that rejection is not a bad thing, but is an opportunity, right? It's a mindset shift, right? I mean, you know, I always look at, irrespective of whatever, how many degrees one has, or how many things one has invented, or whatever, or universities one has went, even a homeless person, right, could be, um, could teach me something. That's the mentality that I have. So I always take opportunities of rejection as moments in which I can get better and I can be taught, right? And so it's about understanding that the rejection is not where it ends, but where it begins, right? And so that is what I would say to the person that asked the question. And oftentimes when you look deep into critiques and criticisms, they have an element of truth in it, right? And your job is to find that element of truth, use it to improve your work and your way of thinking, right? And so for me, rejection is the currency of one of the currencies of research, of scholarship. It is fundamental. And if everyone could be successful, right, then there would be no point, and success wouldn't have the decoration that it has. And so get very used to being rejected. That is part of, the game, right? It's what you do after the rejection. Um,
So what you do after rejection is quite more important than the rejection itself.
that's right.
And
That's
you
right.
should
That's
see
right.
rejection, yeah, not as an obstacle, but an opportunity to improve on what you've done. Thank you very much. Moving away from publication, but still talking on mindset, I'd like to ask a quite personal question. I work in a space where I sit in some committees as the only black person, African person in the committee, in boards where I'm the only African person. And uh, and I'm sure you also have such experiences. Do you ever feel pressure to prove yourself as African in that situation, in that midst?
Yeah, I mean, listen. Thank you for that question, whoever asked it.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Hello?
I can hear you, but I'm not sure you can hear me.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, but can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. So sorry again, once again.
No
So
worries.
I don't know if you got my question, or should
I
I
heard
come
I
again?
heard I heard the question. I heard the question as far as the person
Oh,
being the only black person in the committee and things like that, right?
yeah.
W.E. Du Bois, he's a black intellectual, and he has this term called double consciousness. The term double consciousness means that you have two gaze. You have the gaze of the world, and you have the gaze of yourself. And he describes that phenomenon as one of the things that black people suffer from, especially those like the gentleman that just, or the person, sorry, that just asked the question. I'm going to be a little bit quite, um, less sensitive to this person, and because I'm assuming the person will be able to kind of withstand what I'm going to say. Um, as someone who is in those spaces, you have to quickly forget about yourself and this idea of you know fitting in or wanting to be seen, and because it's really about how you're going to that's the nature of a pioneer, right? You're walking in roads and terrains where no one's done walked before, and so see it more as the burden of the leader that you are experiencing, and understand that in about maybe the next 10 years, when someone else comes to Portugal, right? They will be less alone because you've set the stage for them, right? There's a term, right? We stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And so you're just a giant, and as a consequence of that, you're going to have to endure and pave the way for those behind you. That is the burden of the crown, right? Or right, and so um, and it's not your responsibility to explain to people that you're black. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just not, right? It's not your responsibility to explain to people that you're just as capable as they are. And so I would say that it's being unapologetically yourself. And one of the things that I do is I am ruthlessly, my work ethic is, my mom will sometimes ask me, why aren't you sleeping? And I tell her, like, my dreams keep me up, right? While my competition is sleeping, I'm working, right? So it's about kind of that, especially in those spaces where you're the only black person, I would encourage you to make sure that whenever you're in those rooms, you've read 40 times more as everybody in the room, because in that sense there's absolutely no way that you will lose, right? You will essentially find yourself bending you'll essentially just finding that they're bending to your will, because if it's on strictly just the work, there's no competition, right? And so I would encourage you to continue to be on those committees. Make sure again, take charge, dominate, whatever the case may be, right? Like, you're a pioneer, and that's kind of the burden that you have to carry, and it's your cross that you have to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what I take. So I often tell myself when I'm in such situation that Kudus, you're not there as Kudus, but you're representing every African person, because the impression I give in such meeting is going to be is that gaze that we use to look at every other African person that comes to that space. So you need to make your mark in such situation. Thank you about that. So I'll go to the question and answer session to pick questions from our participants. I'm going to pick 2 or 3 questions because our time is fast spent, and I would like you to answer them as quick as possible. So someone made this comment: when can we have several African journals indexed and or published by top publishers? When can we have referencing style authored by Africans, not just AP or Harvard? When can we have research databases, e.g. genetic database owned, created, and maintained by Africans that are comparable to what we have in other parts of the world? How can we challenge some of the existing norms? These are critical questions that have been asked, and I'm sure you want to make comments on them.
Yeah. After this meeting, I will, or before I leave, I will put in one of the ways in which I can be reached, and where people can ask more questions and engage. But I'll say this: I work in 2 different spaces, both in the entrepreneur space and also in physics. The question that this person has asked, right, it requires a lot of coordination. Coordination in a way where he or she will be surprised that there are people in certain pockets of the world already working towards this, right? So I'll give an example. I know a young lady, for example, in Basel University in Nigeria, who's developing the first ovarian cyst database in Africa, right? Comprehensive, right? And granted, right, like, my company and my nonprofit helped her, with some of the initial infrastructure, right? But now she's sort of developing that pipeline, right? When this person asked about journals, right? There are different things that I think we can take advantage of, right? So a simple example is, let's say, we don't have a journal in physics, right? And let's say, we all in this small group decided to create a journal of physics. There's some certain strategies that I think should do, right? Let's say, maybe I would publish the first article, right? And with that, pull in the people in the North that respect my work, which the actual journal then leverages, right? And then from there, start to systematically curate other research from Africans in that journal. So it's about people that are already established being willing to leverage their credibility, right, in order to help African scholarship, right, in ways that are meaningful. But again, these things are not out of our reach. These are things that, at least from where I stand, are very simple to execute, right? Because if it's about brain power and innovation and so forth, I think part of a lot of the things that academics don't like to speak about is they normally over optimize for knowledge and under optimize for money and products, right? And so a lot of academics, right, they rely on grants and things like that. And so I think one of the opportunities is creating an African scholarship where it's hybrid, right? It's about both about product or developing tools that can generate the capital needed to build these infrastructures without relying on the government and things like that. And that's something that I'm very, very familiar with.
Thank you very much for that. And our time is fast spent. I'm sure the participants have learned a lot from this session, which I've actually learned. I have a book filled up with lessons. Yeah, with that, I will thank Fedayo for the brief session, and I'm handing over to Olagunju to give a summary of the session and what we to expect tomorrow. So sorry about my network issue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kudus. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We have successfully come to the closing of today's session. It's a really interesting ride. We started with Dr. Shaya Bimbola, who took us on interdisciplinary research and African future. He was able to give us a lot of pictorial analogy on what we need to do as African researchers. And one of the key points were we must always communicate with our prospective audience. We don't assume. Whether you're talking as a professional, a professor, an engineer, or linking the two, being an interconnection between those two audiences, we must always identify who our audiences are and communicate with them. And for a system to learn more about itself, the system must ensure it is done from itself so that we could actually vouch for accountability and responsiveness. Then we moved on to the 5 presentation of the abstract, and we were able to see a lot of comments from researchers from the nursing perspective to medical students' accounts on vital signs, and to physiotherapists. It's really an interdisciplinary session. It cuts across all the disciplines. And we'll move from there to the last session after our 5-minute break. And this last session was such an eye-opening to say we don't have to give ourselves excuses of short of resources or being handicapped in one way or the other. We have what it takes. And I want to say that if we don't do it ourselves, who will do it for us? So this is a real 3 hours of knowledge impartation. A good conference will always inform the mind, but a great conference will transform the practice. So let's go back with what is it that we've learned and be able to run with it in our different practices. This brings us to our 2 announcements. We appreciate you for logging in on time today, but we want to plead with you that tomorrow we will only accommodate 1 device per person. So please log in on only 1 device. Second, today we need to mark the register. So you please hold on for the next 20 minutes, even when the conference is over, you will see the link with which you will sign the attendance list. And I want to implore you that tomorrow is going to be another interesting day. We'll be exploring writing the untold stories of Africa. We all agree with me today that it's just the tip of the iceberg. Come tomorrow, come prepare. You will listen to Dr. Tolulope Oshayomi doing justice to this topic. And we all move to the abstract session again, where we see our colleague presenting and we'll learn 1 or 2 things there. Finally, we'll be talking about storytelling as a paradigm shift in Africa. I know it's going to be as intriguing as it is today. So please come one, come all. log in promptly and we'll be here for you. Thank you so much. We appreciate you and God bless. Bye. Remember to sign the attendance list. Don't leave without that, please.